Good afternoon. Please, Ken, switch off the mic. Okay, thanks very much. Buenas tardes. It's a real pleasure to start today this new series called A Conversation with Mexican Indology. And it's a great pleasure to have here Óscar Figueroa, right from Mexico. And also the ambassador, Federico Salas. Thanks for sparing your time. I know that you are just in the middle of a meeting, and we are really grateful. I just want to say two words before giving the floor to the ambassador. Say that Mexican Indology really, it has a place of pride inside the Indology in the Spanish-speaking world, no? In fact, Mexican Indology occupies a place of excellence. And it's little known, not only to the general public, but even to the Hispanic academic world. And that's the reason behind this series, to let people know, that I say that without any doubt, that Mexico is leading the Indology in Spanish all over the world. We had the great Indologists, which passed away a few years ago from Argentina and Peru, and Fernando Tola. But in Mexico, we had people like Benjamin Preciado, also who is started there. And we had also the Indian, Bihar Rasik Joshi, which was there many years teaching Sanskrit in Mexico. Also David Lorenzen from the States, but it is settled there. And a whole galaxy of scholars and we will be able to present right now, three of them: Óscar Figueroa today, and Adrián Muñoz, and Wendy Rodriguez. So without Ambassador, I would like if you could say a few words, and then I will proceed later on with the formal presentation of our speaker this night.
Thank you very much, Óscar. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you tonight. And first of all, I have to express my gratitude to the Instituto Cervantes for offering us this opportunity to make this series of presentations on a topic that, as far as we know, in the Embassy of Mexico, has not been presented or explored before, which is that of Mexican Indology. As you have stated, there has been always an enormous influence of India on Mexican artists, our poets, our writers, from Octavio Paz to Elsa Cross, who recently participated in an online conversation with the Cervantes Institute. Many of our diplomats, like Graciela de la Lama, was also quite influenced by India. And needless to say, this goes back in history. One needs to mention the important influence that it had in José Vasconcelos, who was fascinated by Indian history, and wrote Estudios Indostánicos, which had a tremendous influence on his cultural and educational policies, which in turn had quite an impact in Mexican educational policies. We also know, of course, of the studies of India that have been carried out at the National University of Mexico and at El Colegio de Mexico by people like, as you mentioned, Juan Miguel de la Mora or Benjamin Preciado. And of course, Óscar, we're very grateful to you for, when you enthusiastically proposed the talks on this topic, and we jumped on board immediately, and we're very happy that this series is taking place. I'm very pleased to meet and to have Dr. Óscar Figueroa with us today. I guess he follows on the footsteps of others. He's a new generation, but he has a very impressive curriculum already in these works having to do with India, and I'm sure that that his work will strengthen the Mexican tradition on Indology. Finally, I want to mention that we're very happy that this is taking place in this year in India, where India is celebrating the 75th anniversary of its independence, and we're really very much looking forward to this and the other sessions that will follow it in the next couple of months. And we're ready to listen to Mr. Oscar Figueroa. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Ambassador. Real pleasure. So let's start. And as it is usual, I would like to give a formal introduction to our scholar today, Oscar Figueroa, and say that Oscar Figueroa is a full-time researcher at the Regional Center for Multidisciplinary Research of the famous National Autonomous University of Mexico, la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. He has a bachelor's and master's degree in philosophy from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, and completed doctoral studies both in philosophy at UNAM and in Sanskrit literature at the University of Chicago, in the latter case as a Fulbright scholar. He has also carried out studies and research residences at the Deccan College in Pune, at the Banaras Hindu University, at the École Française d'Extrême-Orient in Pondicherry, and at the University of Florence in Italy. His lines of research include the relationship between the secular and religious spheres in the classic culture of India, the historical development of Hinduism with a special emphasis on the Tantric cults, the cultural history of yoga, the translation and teaching of Sanskrit, and studies on Orientalism, in particular, the reception of the Indian tradition in the Spanish-speaking world. He has an extensive number of publications. We would like to quote here the books El Loto en el Estanque, Canon y Diversidad en la India Clásica, The Lotus in the Pond, Canon and Diversity in Classical India, Tantra y Sexo, Antología de Fuentes Clásicas, Tantra and Sex, Anthology of Classical Sources, Pensamiento y Experiencia Mística en la India, Thought and Mystical Experience in India, El Arte de Desdecir, Inefabilidad y Hermenéutica en India Antigua, The Art of Unsaying, Ineffability and Hermeneutics in Ancient India, and La Mirada Anterior, Poder Visionario e Imaginación en India Antigua, a book that was awarded in 2019 by the International Convention of Asia Scholars as the best academic book in Spanish. He has also translated from Sanskrit into Spanish the classic works of Uppaladeva, Guirnalda de Plegarias a Shiva, and also the book by Kshemendra, Madre por Conveniencia, o El Manual de la Cortesana Perfecta. Also, a very important tantric text called Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, and he's participated in the translation project of the Upanishads. He also has a collective volume, the Bhagavad Gita, la Bhagavad Gita, el clásico de la literatura sánscrita, y su recepción, and he has co-edited Inventing India, Disciplinary Representation from History, the Humanities, and Arts. So, thanks very much, Oscar, for being here. I know that it's 8 o'clock in Mexico, making yourself available at this hour of the morning. And I knew you, we met for the first time, if I am not wrong, at the 15th Ball Sanskrit Conference in 2012, where you were giving a paper on the meaning of the word Anuttara in Abhinava Gupta. And I would like to perhaps begin starting from the beginning, no? Why this interest in Sanskrit? What did you prompt to undertake the study of Indology? And as with all of us, what were the reasons and the sources of inspiration?
Sure. Thank you so much for your kind invitation, dear Oscar. And thank you, of course, to the Instituto Cervantes and the Mexican Embassy in India for organizing this unique series. Thank you to His Excellency, the Ambassador Federico Salas. And thank you, of course, to the audience who has joined us today. It's a pleasure being here to talk about Indian culture and Sanskrit from the point of view of what we do in Mexico. A warm namaste to everyone. So, yeah, back to your question. Well, it all started when I was a college student at the National University in Mexico, which, as you already said, is one of the most important public universities, the largest one in Mexico and probably in Latin America. So I was 19 years old, and I was pursuing a bachelor degree in philosophy, that is in Western philosophy. And then as part of the curricula, there was an elective course called Philosophy of Religion, which in fact was devoted to Indian philosophy. So by that time, and this is important to mention, at a more personal level, I was in the middle of an intense spiritual quest, so to speak. And of course, in my mind, India symbolized mysticism and the depths of the soul, etc. So I welcomed this opportunity of taking this course on Indian philosophy, especially since it was the only option available for a philosophy student at the university. And the teacher was Elsa Cross, a very renowned, acclaimed poet in the Spanish-speaking world, but also an expert in Indian philosophies and religions. So I soon became fascinated with her classes. A whole new world, I would say, it was revealed to me, both at the academic and at personal level. And the enthusiasm didn't fade. No? For the next 2-3 years, I kept taking Elsa's courses. And in that context, I read for the first time the classical Upanishads, Shankara's philosophy, the texts on Sankhya and Yoga. I was introduced to Kashmir Shaivism. And also I tried to read whatever secondary sources were available at that time at the university library. Of course, as you can imagine, the books available were not so many, and their academic quality was often not satisfactory. But we may say that were enough for a Mexican college student. So I read authors like Eliade, the work of Fernando Tola, of course, and also a book called Atadura and Liberación in Spanish, Bondage and Liberation, by Benjamin Preciado and David Lawrenson. And more importantly, again, at a personal level, reading all these materials increased my desire to know India. So I traveled to India for the first time in December 1998, the first of many other trips to come. And I stayed in India for almost 3 years, mostly in Maharashtra and in South India. And after this experience, when the time to return to Mexico arrived, in order to resume my studies at university, I had no doubts, and it was crystal clear that I wanted to pursue graduate studies in Indology, in classical Indology. So I returned to Mexico with that intention in mind, especially expecting to find someone who could teach me Sanskrit properly.
So let me understand. Elsa Cross was teaching you Indian culture and philosophy?
Right.
But not
that was my first approach to India, yes, through her.
Yes. So at that time, where did you learn Sanskrit? At Mexico itself, or outside Mexico? How you continue?
Yes, right. Back in Mexico, I started to learn Sanskrit immediately after completing a master's degree, again in philosophy, again at the National University. And at that time, the only place where you could learn the language was El Colegio de Mexico, a graduate educative center that has an Asian studies program. And the teacher was Rasik Bihari Joshi, an eminent Pandit from Rajasthan who completed his doctoral studies in La Sorbonne in France. And many years later, he was invited to join El Colegio de Mexico. And I have to say that I was truly fortunate that Professor Joshi accepted me in his Sanskrit classes, even though I wasn't a formal graduate student at El Colegio de Mexico. So in this way, for the next 2 years, from 2002 to 2004, I learned Sanskrit with him every morning from Monday to Thursday. I remember very well. And in this way, I was able to cover all the aspects of Sanskrit grammar in the traditional style, memorizing one paradigm after another. And thanks to him as well, to Dr. Benjamin Preciado, also professor at El Colegio de Mexico, I started reading Sanskrit classics like the Bhagavad Gita, Ramayana, Kalidas, etc. However, after this training, there was no further options in Mexico. So I started looking for doctoral programs in the USA, basically. And finally, I chose the University of Chicago. The US government granted me a Fulbright fellowship. And in the summer of 2004, I moved to Chicago. And then there in Chicago, I had the opportunity to continue studying Sanskrit with brilliant scholars and great human beings. At different stages, I took classes with people like Sheldon Pollock, Jigal Bronner, Gary Tuve, Wendy Doniger, the late Stephen Collins, and others. And thanks to all of them, I was able to read an important number of texts of all types from different periods, traditions, geographical areas. Also during this period, I was able to undertake a couple of research stays in India, one in the Deccan College in Pune, in Maharashtra, and the other in Banaras. And in these two places, I read different texts with the help of great teachers. And so this wide range of courses and the combination of Western and traditional approaches, I think allowed me to expand my understanding of Indian tradition beyond my original focus on religion and philosophy. So I started to appreciate India in its own right as one of the classical cultures of ancient world. I understood this fascinating and diverse culture was one of the intellectual heritage of humanity. And with this formation, I returned to Mexico, let me see, in 2009, and I myself began teaching Indian philosophy at the National University.
Wow, quite impressive. And so you had both kind of teachings, say like a Pandit like Rasik Bihari Joshi and people more in the Western way. And can you point out the differences between a traditional teaching from an Indian Pandit and a Western scholar?
Yes, of course. There's a difference.
They're very different, right?
Right, they are very different, but at the same time, I think that they may be complementary. No? You can enrich your approach, taking what these two options offer. No?
Certainly. No, I think and traditional pandits are really like living books. No, yes. They have this interiorization of the wisdom, which is very, very, very interesting the way they teach. Anyway, thanks for this view of your studies of Sanskrit. As I said, I mean, your range of interests are quite wide. And as I met you, you know, and you were speaking about Abhinavagupta. And I think even Indian people, no? I mean, most people, they know about Vedanta. Vedanta is very famous. But I think only scholars and people in the Indological field, they know about the so-called Shivaism of Kashmir, Kashmiri Shaivaism, which has attracted a lot of attention from Western scholars. No, it's perhaps one of the philosophical schools who attracts more interest. Can you explain to our audience what is Kashmiri Shaivaism and why it's so relevant today?
Yes, sure. I'm afraid this question deserves a long answer. I will try to summarize, but let me begin by saying that I'm glad that you recognize that my range of interests is wide. It is indeed. And it is so because, as you said, I understand ancient India above all as one of the most diverse and sophisticated cultures of antiquity. Having said that, and passing to Kashmir Shaivism. So this name has become the generic way of referring to what was in fact a rather complex and rich net of religious and intellectual traditions that developed in Kashmir mainly from the 7th, 8th centuries, common era to 11th, 12th centuries. Now, I would say that at least in the last 10, 15 years, the growing popularity of this tradition has run in parallel to the significant progress achieved by the scholarly research on Tantra. So in fact, within Indology, the study of Tantra has probably been the most productive field, only comparable to the study of yoga. So to a large extent, the interest in Kashmir Shaivism relates to the interest in Tantra. So now why the Tantric tradition has become so important? There are many ways to engage this question, of course. An important fact is that there is no Tantra per se. No? Tantra always arises and flourishes within a tradition already constituted. It's a particular way of understanding and interpreting the truths of any given tradition, Shaiva tradition, Vaishnava tradition, Bauddha, Jain tradition, etc. In that sense, Tantric doctrines are a sort of vantage point, so to speak, to look at the totality of Indian religions. And since Tantric doctrines usually presuppose a critique of canonical values and ideals, then the perspective one can obtain by looking at Indian culture through the lenses of Tantra may be quite illuminating. In particular, Tantra showed that regardless one's lifestyle, intellectual leanings, social status, we all live conditioned by a natural disposition to classify reality in terms of what is to be preferred and what is to be avoided. Or put it in tantric terms, what is pure and what is impure. So it is a universal attitude displayed at different levels. And being universal, it permeates religions and philosophies as well. Those we have all these kinds of hierarchies. No, the mind is purer than the body, the soul is purer than the mind, etc. So these hierarchies and distinctions also operate at the social and individual levels, no, in terms of age, gender, profession, social status. And this determines one's identity in terms, again, of what I'm allowed to do or what I should avoid. Well, Tantra, especially its most radical trends, has to do with questioning and dismantling this construct, this type of identity. And a particular powerful way to achieve this is by entering into contact with, as well using ritually and symbolically, that which the establishment considers as impure or potentially dangerous. I mean by this all things related to death, sensorial activity, desire, etc. So this is what underlies typically tantric transgressive acts. So again, back to Kashmir Shaivism. Kashmir Shaivism represents one of the most philosophically mature outputs of this approach, of this tantric approach to reality. It represents the attempt at articulating a system of thought and contemplative praxis on the basis of the tantric transgressive curriculum, so to speak. And within Kashmir Shaivism, Abhinavagupta, a thinker from the 11th century, that is almost 5 centuries after the origins of Tantra, he represents one of the most sophisticated elaborations of the same ideals. So for instance, as part of this elaboration, Abhinavagupta states that the problem with classifying things as pure and impure is that we erroneously, by mistake, assume that these categories are objective qualities instead of a projection on the part of the individual. Purity and purity exist in one's mind and not in things themselves. And this projection also allows control, indeed, allows control over reality, in terms, again, of what is beneficial or what is prohibited and so on. But this control, says Abhinavagupta, represents at the same time a lack of freedom. For example, by restricting the truth, the highest self or God to the purest realm at the expense of everything else. The self is pure, from that point of view, but impotent. Therefore, the effort should be directed not to transcend this world and the components of my subjectivity, but to transcend my relationship with that very world and myself, and perceive objects, my body, my mental activity, purity and impurity, as the free manifestation of one single consciousness, all-encompassing consciousness. So, and if everything is a free manifestation of one single divine consciousness, then in order to attain liberation, the individual should simply leave behind his fears and doubts and recognize the fact that he has always been that very consciousness. So this is I would say, an affirmative, an inclusivistic philosophy in which acts of renunciation become kind of meaningless. So I think modern interest in Kashmir Shaivism and Abhinavagupta lies here, in this approach. It is a worldview that involves a deep affirmation of life, and the here and now. And I think that it's attractive, at least in principle, to a modern mind. Of course, there is a risk of oversimplification, but at least in principle, again, I think it is quite attractive.
Well, that's very interesting, really. So would it be right to say that Tantra then somehow uses impurity as a way of spiritual achievement? Or another way of saying it, does Tantra use the energy of sensual desire as a means of spirituality, which will be different from the classical way of the renouncer? Is that right? Or
yes, from a general, a broad point of view, that's correct. Is the use of impurity or what the establishment considers impurity as a path, in order to dismantle all this construct, all this tendency to classify things in terms of purity and impurity, right?
That's really good. And as Óscar Figueroa says, I think Abhinavagupta is not only a great philosopher, but he's only a great writer. In fact, in the Indian tradition itself, Abhinavagupta was known as a theorist for the doctrine of rasa, for aesthetic theory. But he was less known as a philosopher of Kashmiri Saivaism inside the tradition itself. No? But I wanted to underline that Abhinavagupta, as a writer, and his Sanskrit is really incredible, and the use of metaphors and philosophical arguments. So Abhinavagupta, for those who never heard of him, along with Shankaracharya, is perhaps one of the best writers of the Sanskrit tradition. But you also translated, and I am really impressed by that, a text which is also from the Shivaism of Kashmir, the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, which is published in Spain, in Spanish. And if I am not wrong, this text describes 112 ways to enter in the universal and transcendental state of consciousness. I think it's a very difficult test, and it is really, a privilege to have this text translated directly into Spanish. It's not easy to find people able to do that. So my question basically is, tell us about Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, why you choose this text. And if you want to add, what are the difficulties of translating texts such as from Sanskrit into Spanish?
Sure. So yes, this book appeared in 2017 in Spain. It is a short tantra belonging precisely to what is known as Kashmir Shaivism. More exactly, it belongs to a late stage of development of the Trika tradition. This tradition is called Trika because Trika means a triad, because the original cult revolved around the worship of three goddesses and their consorts. So now the text association with the Trika is a bit paradoxical, because unlike earlier sources in the same tradition, the Vijnana Bhairava instructs seekers to go beyond the Trika system of ritual and worship, and instead embrace a purely contemplative relationship with the divine in all things and in any circumstance. So unlike previous tantras in the same tradition, the Vijnana Bhairava doesn't give instructions about typical components of tantric worship like initiation, codes of conduct, mandalas, mantras, and all other kinds of ritual procedures. Quite the contrary, it simply teaches that the divine already permeates both the physical world as well as our mental world, and therefore cultivating an awareness of this divine ubiquity can transform ordinary experience into a doorway to a transcendental state of consciousness. So on this ground, the text teaches this 112 contemplative techniques or exercise. Bhavanas is the technical term. And why the number 112? Well, as you know, Óscar, in Indian texts, numbers sometimes have a rhetoric import, in the sense that they are a way of saying that there are many, even infinite options, all of them genuine. So this is the message, I think, of the 112 contemplations. In reality, as long as one is able to induce the powerful presence of the divine, details like where, when, or how are irrelevant. That's the message, the main teaching of the text. At the same time, this list of bhavanas, of 112 bhavanas, shows a preference for certain experiences, like breathing, sensorial activity, mental activity, volitional activity. So the text insists that in all these experiences, the focus must be on the middle space, the interstice between breathing out and breathing in, one perception and another, etc. Another important set of contemplation is devoted to, to experiences that are ordinary and yet unusual, either if one provoked them or if they occur spontaneously. For example, listening to music, relishing tasty food, feeling pain or fear, seeing a good friend after a long time, marveling at a cloudless open sky, etc. All these experiences have the power to interrupt, even for a second, our ordinary state of mind and produce a sort of excess of energy, that the advanced yogi can recognize and transform into an opportunity to grasp the presence of the divine, transforming his own identity. So it's a very interesting text. In particular, all these descriptions of common experiences make it worth to read, I think. And why not put its teachings into practice? Now, about translating this text, of course, it's a difficult task, I would say, as any other Sanskrit text. And we have two commentaries, two classic commentaries on this text, and it was very helpful to resort to them in order to produce an approximate translation.
Wow, that's really so. It's really inspiring, to know that you have this kind of day-to-day spirituality, when you can use the relishing of a dish, or watching the clouds pass by, or listening to music, and it is a very, I think there is always this relation between spirituality and art and aesthetics in the world of Kashmiri Shaivaism, and this connection between art and spirituality. I think it's a very also, I think, very dear to the modern world, and the modern world somehow has desacralized everything in the West. But if one thing remains with a kind of, is looked upon as some kind of sacred experience, is art. And in that sense, and that sensibility really goes very well with our own. And let's still dwell a little bit more on Tantra, because you also published very recently, and that was in Editorial Kairos in Barcelona, one book that also caught my attention, which is called Tantra y Sexo, Antología de Fuentes Clásicas. Now, my question here, it's not a stereotype to relate Tantra and sex. And we know, that many things about Tantric sex come from fake gurus from California with very little relation to the Indian tradition, and it's become a kind of industry, to relate. So what is I'm sure that you'll go back to the classical sources. So what can you tell us about what really classical and serious Tantra says about sex?
Yes, I agree. The relation Tantra and sex is a modern stereotype, but it is also a historical fact. At least within some of the most esoteric and radical tantric traditions. And to a larger extent, the stereotype depends on ignorance about the fact. So what I attempted with this book is precisely to go to the texts themselves, to put them to the reach of a larger audience, so that they can speak by themselves, and to some extent correct the misunderstandings regarding this particular aspect of tantric doctrine and practice. So to that end, I selected and translated representative passages in 12, 15 tantras from different traditions and periods. And this selection includes early and late Shaiva tantras, Buddhist tantras, and the sophisticated interpretation of thinkers like Abhinavagupta, and even a number of relevant passages in Hatha Yoga texts, where we find also components associated with sex. So put together for the first time, not only in Spanish, but I would say, but also in any language, all these materials will help the reader to identify what is the main problem with modern stereotyped formulas, like those you already mentioned, like tantric sex, sacred sex, mystical sex, and so on. We have all these categories, which all of them function as a sort of commercial brand, in which, but if you see carefully, in all these categories, tantric sex, sacred sex, etc., the emphasis is placed on sex, used as a noun, whereas the adjective tantric works as a rhetoric tool to suggest intensity. This is the essence of the business industry associated with tantric sex. This book does the opposite. It places the emphasis on tantra And within that context, it explores the topic of sexuality as one of its aspects, using the Sanskrit sources themselves as the foundation. So this means, of course, that not all Tantra is about sex. No? Rather, it is an element present in some traditions, in general traditions with a distinctively transgressive approach to reality. No? And even in this case, the references to erotic or sexual acts only make sense as part of typically tantric systems of ritual, symbols, ideas, doctrines, etc. So therefore, again, the book is more about Tantra than about sex. No, and it explores tantric sexual rituals and other tantric expressions involving sexuality as a doorway to get to know this rich tradition. So in this connection, I think one of the main contributions of the book is to show that the role played by sexuality in Tantra, far from being linear or uniform, involves a historical development and a significant degree of variation. In some texts, the ritual involves ascetic control and avoidance of orgasm, for example. In other texts, the emphasis is on the production of impure substances to be used as transgressive offerings to worship the deities. And in late sources, or in more philosophical-oriented authors like Abhinavagupta, sexual activity is represented as a powerful means for expansion of consciousness. And finally, one should not forget that in many tantric sources, the ritual use of sexuality is combined with love magic, most of the times with the purpose of attaining supernatural powers, no? Like controlling other people's mind, attracting the person one likes, etc. So I hope these few comments give a clear idea about the contents of the book.
But I think it's really good to define, that and in the case of the fake tantric sex is the noun and tantra is the adjective, and vice versa. That's a very good point. And I think, as you know very well, sexual metaphors have been alive in all religious tradition,
Yes.
Because both we have already the famous one from Upanishads, that says that it's like a man and a woman tied in a deep embrace. Would be just to close this, but this chapter, would be right to say that we use this sexual metaphor because we want to experience honestness, unity with the universe, or non-duality, and sex is just a symbol of this unity of contraries in case, and that's part of the importance and the power of this sexual metaphor, where duality and distinctions are abolished. Would be that right?
Yes, I agree totally. No, sexual attraction and love is what we have as our most powerful and immediate experience, to then construct like a rich philosophy, in the same lines. So of course, yes, there's a connection between ordinary experience, immediate experience of love, and then these kind of discourses, these kind of elaborations.
Well, time is running very fast, unfortunately.
Yes, indeed.
The conversion is very rich. I would like then to move forward from Tantra, and also to comment on a book, which also drew my attention very much. I haven't read it, but which is La Mirada Anterior, Poder Visionario e Imaginación en India Antigua, which I have tentatively translated as The Preceding Look, Visionary Power and Imagination in Ancient India. Can you tell us about that? What is all about? What is this Mirada Anterior? And what is this power of vision and imagination in Ancient India?
Yes, well, this is an historical exploration of the uses of imagination in classical India in different contexts. So I start with the Vedic tradition, the oldest tradition we know, and then I move to other traditions throughout the classical period, like the philosophical traditions, and then of course aesthetic traditions, literary traditions, and I conclude in Tantra again. So and I in that section, in tantric section, I I explore Vinyana Bhairava, Vinabhagupta, all these authors we have already mentioned, no? And the purpose is to show the importance, no? How important is imagination in all these moments throughout the history of classical India, no? Ancient India, and emphasizing that imagination was conceived as the faculty that on which depends the construction of our reality, you know? And therefore on which depends the way we are located in our world. How we conceive ourselves, how we conceive others, how we conceive our world depends on imagination. And therefore, since this is such a key faculty, cultivation of this faculty is very important. So once one has to cultivate this faculty in order to build a different reality. So that's why I call it a previous look, in the sense that in some authors, especially in Tantric authors, imagination is not something, is not a reactive faculty, no? But instead it's an active faculty. It's not that we receive information from the world and then imagine things, but rather is that we first imagine things, and that determines the way we look at things, the way we look at the world. And therefore, if one cultivates this power, then the world may change. The world has a different meaning. So basically, that's the main point of this book.
Very interesting, really. So it's a creative faculty, right? This reminds me, perhaps in a different way, and I am moving away from India, of what Marcel Proust used to say about imagination, no? Proust used to praise, you know, Noah in the ark. Say that while Noah was in the ark, he was perceiving better the world than when he was looking at the world. He said that when you are just you know, deprived from the sensorial experience, that world that you recreate in your imagination, it's even richer than reality, because you see many nuances and construct worlds that when you are just facing reality, and somehow you are able to perceive, no? So it's a very, very, very interesting, I think, would be. Well, let's move now, because as I say, I would like to have some time for questions. And my question now is completely different. It's not about books, not about your work. And I would love to continue this conversation for this so many, but it's a thing that somehow, you know, it's a question that all we, who are Spanish speakers, have in our mind, you know, why Spanish Indology has been almost non-existent compared to other European languages like French, German, Italian, Russian, or even Polish, you know, I mean, and what do you think about, what are the challenges of Spanish Indology? What is the situation now in a place like Mexico?
Right.
And what is the future for it? We would really like to see a big change and see more and more faculties and Indologies, both in Spain and Latin America. And what is your take on that?
Yes. Well, I don't know if there's a simple answer to that question. I think there are many factors, you know, involved. As far as I can see, the academic interest in India, in the Spanish-speaking world, at least in Spain, achieved a significant progress by the end of the 19th century and the first decades of the 20th century, when the first scholarly translations of classical texts were published. But then, I don't know, something happened, no? Many circumstances, some of them extra academic, stopped this early achievement. And at the same time, I think we became more and more dependable on French and English scholarly research and translations. And outside the academia, the consolidation of the stereotyped image of India didn't help much. No? On the contrary, we enter in a sort of a vicious cycle. No? The larger audience demands more of the same topics, no? Ordinarily associated with India: spirituality, mysticism, meditation, in the last years, yoga, etc. And conditioned by these commercial publishing houses, I think, no? An editor satisfied this demand with works of low scholarly quality but popular appeal, or by recycling works that have been that have a secure audience. And on the other hand, due to complex historical reasons, the academia in our countries hasn't developed enough resources to provide alternatives or improve the situation, and sometimes simply either renounces to the effort of translating Sanskrit texts or participates in this circle by translating texts in the same lines. So, but at the same time, as I said before, the Spanish-speaking Indology has witnessed significant progress in the last 20 years. And perhaps we could start by acknowledging these small steps and granting them the credit, the merit they deserve. And I'm thinking, of course, in your contributions, Óscar, your dictionary, which is a fabulous, so important step in this consolidation, your Sanskrit Spanish dictionary, and also, of course, your work on the Natya Shastra, Abhinavagupta, Bilhana, Patanjali, and other Sanskrit intellectuals. I'm thinking also in the contributions of people in Spain, like Juan Arnau, his work on Nagarjuna and other Buddhist philosophers, and in general, his efforts to establish a dialogue between India and Western philosophies. Other names come to my mind, like Francisco Rubio, who recently published a translation of two works attributed to Kalidasa, Jose Virgilio Garcia Travaso, translator of the Tales of the Panchatantra, Javier Ruiz Calderon, who translated the Vedanta Sara, Laia Villegas, who translated Sankhya Karika. In Mexico, we have the important contributions of Gracia de la Lama, Benjamin Preciado, David Lawrenson, Luis Gonzalez Reyman, and more recently, the contributions of my colleague at the National University, Wendy Phillips. At the Colegio de Mexico, we have Roberto Garcia, Adrián Muñoz, and I may be missing other names. And of course, we have the contributions from scholars in other parts of the Spanish-speaking world, beginning with the prolific work of Fernando Tola and Carmen Dragonetti. So if we consider all these names, we easily have 15 or 20 names who have produced or are right now producing fine research and translations. So if we take more advantage of all these materials, for example, writing reviews on them, spreading the word among our students and larger audiences, and more importantly, establish projects of collaboration and exchange, I think things may start looking differently. So I think there's a future as long as we work as a team across the whole Spanish-speaking world. Of course, as part of such future collaboration, an important task should be not only mapping what has already been achieved, like I'm doing here, but also identifying what needs to be done, but as a team. And I'm thinking in terms of translation, there are many things to do, only a few hymns, for example, of such an important text as the Rig Veda have been translated so far. About the two great narratives, the Ramayana and Mahabharata, there is almost nothing in direct translations. And as far as I know, there is virtually nothing about Puranas, Ayurvedic, Dharma Shastra, Alankara Shastra, Kama Shastra, philosophical traditions like logic, grammar, etc., many other areas. So there's indeed a lot of work to do, but I think right now we have a good number of people who could contribute to this task.
So you think there is hope for Sanskrit in Spanish?
Yes, I think so, yes.
No, that's wonderful. I think we should really try, to come together. Now that we have this new, and I think, I don't know, but there's been very little international seminar Spanish-speaking seminars on Sanskrit. No, I think there are very few of them, perhaps, and we should strive for that. And as I said, technology is helping us.
Yes,
it's bringing us nearer. This is an example of it. No, so I think I will end on this happy note, and I think it's very inspiring, to see that there are scholars that as you say, we should come together at both parts of the Atlantic, both in Spain and in America. And in Latin America, there are many countries. Argentina is there, Peru has León Herrera. You remember, we must be very old. and even Colombia and Costa Rica also has Sanskrit studies. So that's
correct. Yes.
I would like to, before ending, because I didn't do that in the beginning, and I feel obliged to do that, the figure of a person who left us not long time ago. In fact, I could visit him. My last time I was in Mexico, 2016, and that was Juan Miguel de la Mora. I think he was at the same university that you were there. He was a very well-known scholar. He was part of the World Sanskrit Conference and had studied in India. So I think I'm sure you worked with him many times when he was still alive, and he died at a very advanced age. So my homage here to Juan Miguel de la Mora, a great also and Mexican Sanskritist. We will end with this and open the floor for questions, if any. Since we are not many people, you can switch on your camera and mic and start asking questions. So the floor is yours, of all the audience. Thank you very much.
Well,
Yes.
if nobody's asking, nobody
Please.
more well-informed than me is asking any question now, let me make 2 or 3 observations. Well, both of you are Oscars, and you coincide in your very deep knowledge, both of you. We have gained so much, at least I have gained so much from the depth of this conversation. Being an Indian Hispanist, it was a privilege to learn from both of you. I would certainly, like Óscar Pujol, like to pay homage to Miguel de la Mora. He was a good friend of mine, and in fact, I was in his house. He invited me to Unam, and I was visiting a scholar there also for some time. And he gave me a lot of opportunity to interact with many other scholars in Indology. Unfortunately, Óscar Figueroa was not available at that time, but his friendship would have really given me a lot more to know. Well, I have 2 specific observations. Obviously, as you can see, I do not have any great depth of knowledge in this tradition that you are talking about, the Sanskrit tradition of India and its impact outside. But I have 2 observations. One is, I'm asking Óscar Figueroa this question. For a very long time, from the very initial, from the last part of the Mexican Revolution, we know the role of Vasconcelos in spreading the Indian, Sanskrit tradition in Indology, by first not only writing this Estudios Hindustánicos, but also bringing to the Mexicans a whole lot of translations from the Indian tradition, from the Indian classical tradition. One of the most important things that he did was to bring in Tagore, and he translated, he made 4 important books as part of school and general curriculum for the common people of Mexico. And this was a great initiation of Indology in Mexico. Particularly, Vasconcelos saw in Tagore this ability to combine the Vedantic philosophy and the Buddhist philosophy of love, and gain so much for his own concept of rasa cosmica. And he was instrumental in spreading this knowledge about India through these books at a very popular level. Thousands. First edition consisted of more than 25,000 books, which were distributed at a very popular level. Now, after this, the study of Indology, I understand, came to be more organized only after the El Colegio de Mexico took up the courses on Indology in the 60s. And then, the coming of so many Indologists, who entered into Indology in more details. Now, my question is, this shift from a very popular level, the Vasconcelos model, to a very organized study of Indology in the El Colegio model, did this second phase, very organized study of Indology, do some kind of a restriction, I won't say damage, restriction to the very popular level of Indology that was started by Vasconcelos? So this is my first question. And the second question would relate to, this, I am a student of, I have studied Octavio Paz and written a few things about him. Apart from all that has been said about Octavio Paz, one thing is not very clear, and that is how much of Octavio Paz used the Tantric tradition to bring in his concept of vacuity. Most people know that it was the Shunyata tradition in India that he talks about, but very few people have, or scholars have, gone into the relationship that Octavio Paz might have had with the Tantric tradition of vacuity. Now, whether more studies have come out on this, I say this because, I, through some research with a Bangladesh scholar, Raju Alauddin, I have been able to understand that it was when Octavio Paz was in Paris in the 20s, Muhammad Shahidullah, who was a great author of this Tantric tradition, his book was taken, he went to Paris and his book was discussed in Paris. At that time, Octavio Paz was also in Paris. Now, but very little has been said about either this relationship or, this is the kind of thing that Shahidullah talks about, that Tantric tradition, which in many of the poems of Octavio Paz, I find that tradition, Tantric tradition, present. His readings of, he has translated later, in the later part of his work, he has translated some Buddhist work, in the Tantric tradition. So he has very closely used certain images and metaphors that belong to this Tantric tradition. Whether any further work on this, any more light has been thrown on this relationship of Octavio Paz going into that Tantric tradition to understand and then turn them into poetic experiences of where he's giving the metaphors of vacuity, whether that is available or has been done or is anybody doing. I would be interested in understanding this. Now, these are the two observations. With that, I will end my intervention. Thank you so much. Thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Professor Ganguly. I'm glad you asked this because right now I'm part of a collaborative project that's trying to precisely to research, to do some research on these connections between India and Mexican culture, the Latin American cultures, literary cultures, etc. So I'm glad about your question. So I'm going to start with your last question about past. I could say that, yes, indeed, two elements are key to understand why Octavio was able to say more about India in respect to what others had said before. So, and those things are tantric traditions and poetic traditions. So compared to Vasconcelos and other previous intellectuals, Paz was the first who paid attention, careful attention to all these other aspects of Indian culture, tantric and poetic tradition. And with these two elements, he was able to expand the understanding of India and to have more elements to incorporate all these elements into Mexican culture, into the approach from a Mexican to India. So I agree with you, and indeed this requires more research, and to really recognize, to really emphasize the importance of tantric traditions in the past understandings of India. Yes. Sure. And regarding your first questions, your first question. Yes, we would say that the way we create institutions, yes, to study India, formal institutions, it has some negative effect on the popular dissemination of these ideas, compared to what the Vasconcelos did. And of course, that implies that we are called to make an extra effort, of course, so that all this knowledge can reach larger audiences, and that's of course that's part of the challenge we have in the Spanish-speaking world. Indeed.
Okay. Thanks very much. We have only time for 2 questions more, and the first one is by Maria Teresa Oliva.
Good morning. Sorry for my bad English, or not impure English. Well, I did. Do these, Dr. Figueroa, do these academic studies motivated you to carry on some personal practice? The results obtained in your practice made you change the course or an analysis of classical texts or complement them? Thank you.
That's a good question. Okay, but I don't know if I'm going to answer that, but or at least in detail. But yes, I have a personal practice, but I would say that I prefer to keep these two areas separated. No, yes, I have always done that, and of course, something may some elements may appear in my teaching, in my scholarly research, but at least that my intention is to keep that separated. Other scholars do have a different approach to this. They openly speak about their practice and their academic work, and they combine openly these two things. But I prefer to keep them separated. But yes, I do have some practice, yes, some personal practice, yes.
So some people say that this is a closet Hindu, right?
Yes.
Somebody. Anyway, that's so interesting. And the last question is for Viva Maurya. Please, Viva.
Hola, Óscar.
Hola. Bueno, dos, sí.
Conozco a los dos y qué encantada, Óscar, a verte. And I'm absolutely joining Professor Ganguly in this very interesting and very in-depth, profound talk. I mean, conversation with these two pundits. have carried out, and it has really given me a great delight, and I'm really happy that I joined today's talk. My question is a bit about the practice of Sanskritism in India, for example. I mean, you may accuse us, people like us, the left liberal and whatever, who approach the Sanskrit studies in India as the, I don't know whether it is the same in the West, with the what do you call the traditional language, old languages, ancient languages. But in India, for example, we look at, and it is not without basis that we look at the Sanskrit scholars as being very sort of, I mean, if I can say it very bluntly, conservative and, very dogmatic in their practice and all that. And this thing has come to me. I mean, I've learned this from Juan Miguel de Mora, because I always used to say that why can't our scholars read Sanskrit text as he read them, with more kind of a scientific approach to it. And today's talk also has given me this impression that, and that's why I want to really congratulate you, Oscar, that it was, when I talk to Óscar Pujol also, I always feel this thing, that there is I mean, we always criticize the Eurocentrism and, the global South and all that, but there is an approach to Sanskrit studies, which I think is quite enlightening for us. I mean, at least we who are outside the field. And I don't know whether you have the same impression about the Sanskrit scholars of India, because they are still stuck in that. And that's why, it all looks so ahistoric and, and more, I mean, Tantric, you don't even talk to us about, because the popular understanding of the Tantric are the latest asarams, and, half of them are already in jail and things like that. And the Tantrics and the sex. So that is one sort of curiosity that I have. And the second thing is that I was very impressed by the all what you told, and Óscar asked, and you talked, both of you talked about, was the Kashmiri Shaivism. And I thought that it almost looked like a subversive, subverting the classical or the iconic, or I don't know how will you call it, the study. And this Abhinav Gupta and all these people are kind of looking at these texts from a different angle. And I thought that it was very interesting, because this is what is required. I mean, this is what is required when we talk about the Sanskrit studies in India, that you look at all the aspects of this, and not only, stuck in some tradition which is sort of so rudimentary and as well as so static. I mean, we are almost like the Orientalists ourselves, looking at the Sanskrit text. So these are the two curious questions that I have, nothing more. And nice to see you, Óscar, again after Berlin.
Yes. Thank you so much for being here, Viva, and thank you for your questions. Yes, I know that Tantra is kind of a taboo, in today's India, and but yes, definitely these traditions give us a lot to think, regarding the way we study and the way we talk about classical India, and also the way we understand today's India. So yes, I agree with you. It's very important to transcend the taboo and start studying more deeply, even inside India, these kind of traditions. And I think when you were talking about all this tendency of Indian scholars, and I would say also some Western scholars, this tendency to think India as something outside history, and like a tradition that has no social dynamics, and a tradition that is very static, and that is everything is about abstract concepts and essence and things like that. I think another approach that may help is not to forget other classical Indian traditions that were expressed not in Sanskrit. I think that's also very important, to start giving full credit also to Tamil classical tradition, Telugu classical tradition, Kannada classical tradition. That's very important. And we have a lot of work to do, an immense work, even perhaps a greater work to do than in Sanskrit. We have many Sanskrit scholars in India and outside India, but we have very few scholars in all these traditions, which are also classical, no? In the sense that they have they have produced an immense amount of wisdom, no? In all fields of in all kinds of sciences and literary production, etc. So that would be like a strategy to decenter, so to speak, to decenter, no? The Sanskrit, this Sanskrit kind of
Sanskrit-centric
importance. Right, exactly. Thank you.
Yes. Even Pali itself, you know, has a lot of interesting material. And as Viva said, you know, I mean, there is a lot of work to be done, and many people ignore. Sometimes you find all these pandits which are much more liberal than you would ever think, you know. That's one thing. And I speak from experience, you know, back in Banaras. But also would like to draw the attention, you know, that I think the first allegate against death penalty, I think it's found in the Mahabharata, and it's a dialogue between Dyumatsena and Satyavan. And it's a very impressive thing, because there you have a strong, you know, arguments again for banishing death sentence and capital punishment. No, even you would find a strong critique of marriage in the Mahabharata, in the history of the origins of marriage. There is a very interesting story which says that before marriage, women were free, and the word it uses is swatantra. So we will know that in Sanskrit swatantra, and that was a dharma which was much better for women, and it explains how patriarchy came all about. So I mean to say that there are many aspects. It's not all about Varna Ashram Vyavastha, you know, there is much more than that. And there is a lot of progressive thinking in Sanskrit. And as Óscar said, you know, I mean, of course, we have the Tamil tradition, we have Marathi, we have a treasure there, you know, but it's so huge, and we will need much more scholars in that sense. I am extending too much, and I said that there were only 2 questions allowed, but I cannot say no to Sonia, which raised her hand. And please, let's conclude with Sonia.
Just one sentence I want to add.
Yes.
Ludwika, you know, Juan Miguel's
Yes.
wife, she's in touch with me, and she's continuing her translation work of Juan Miguel's.
I know.
Yeah.
It's so good that you mentioned her, actually. So nice. So Sonia, let's conclude with you.
I just wanted to say that I at one point of time I wanted to do my university studies in Sanskrit, and I didn't, of course. I landed up doing Spanish. But when I entered the JNU, one of the things that we learned about was the Lokayat, you know, the ancient Indian
Materialist.
Yeah, the materialist tradition. So I'm wondering if those have been translated into Spanish. The Charvak.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Dr. Gupta. Nice to meet you. No, we have had some conversation by email, but it's nice to meet here. Thank you so much. No, we don't have anything translated, as far as I know, about these materialistic, hedonistic traditions, asceticals, etc. Is one of the projects of my translation list, by the way, trying to all this a selection, of course, of some important passages about these Lokayat and Charvaka traditions. Yes, but no, so far we don't have anything. Yes, and it would be very important to have them, also to have a wider look, a wider panorama about this the richness of the Indian tradition, including these kind of voices. Yes.
Well, thanks very much. Still, there are more questions. I cannot take them, in the chat about the, and I'm sorry, it's too late. Thanks to all of you for participating. I would just like to, like to say one thing. Speaking of Spanish Indology, we have here with us a very special person, actually, which is a promise of Spanish Indology. And I refer to Maria Ruiz, who is here if she wants to open, because she's studying and Sanskrit at the Sampurnanand Sanskrit University. She speaks a wonderful Hindi and Sanskrit. She's been awarded, several awards, and she's doing her research in a very unknown Shastra, which is Mimamsa, which is a very interesting, and it's a base for so many Shastras. So thanks, Maria, for being here with us. Don't know if you hear us. It's a pleasure to have you here on board. Okay, that's Maria.
Thank you very much, Óscar.
Yes.
It's just my pleasure and my privilege that I get to do these studies, and I'm just studying at the moment. Then we'll see when I get enough knowledge, then I also get to write like you all and contribute also to this.
How many years you've been now there in Banaras studying?
It's been 9 years now.
Wow, that's
Great. Nice to meet you, Maria. Are you from Spain or from Mexico?
Well, I was born in Mexico, but my parents are both Spanish, so I've got like nationalities.
Wow.
Awesome. Okay.
So a pleasure.
All the best.
Thanks very much. And thank you to all of you for all your contributions. It's really necessary, that we keep working on.
Thank you.
And I pass the floor to Martí, our cultural manager.
So yeah, hello everyone. Actually, I would like to ask a question, but I think we run out of time, and I do it next time. So maybe we have the occasion to have Óscar Figueroa again with us. And well, so I just want to thank Óscar Figueroa on behalf of Instituto Cervantes, and Óscar Pujol as well for doing the interview. And yeah, and you and the Embassy of Mexico, of course, for the support and collaboration. In any case, you are all invited to the next meeting, with Adrián Muñoz on the 31st of March. So we will do it on Zoom as well, and you are all invited. And on the 28th of April, we will have with us Wendy Phillips. So this is our series devoted to Mexican Indology. And well, so thank you very much, and see you soon.
I have a small query, curiosity. Can I?
Yes.
Just a small curiosity. This is a question for the Mexican Óscar. Where is Benjamin Preciado? He's a very good friend of mine, but I have, he came to India also. I was there in his Guadalajara house and in El Colegio de Mexico. Very good friend of mine, collaborated. But, suddenly we lost touch. Where is he?
As far as I know, he's still at the Colegio de Mexico. He's about to retire, but as far as I know, he's still there in the Colegio.
See,
but
I would like to say, Professor Ganguly, that we invited him also, right? And
yes, exactly.
We invited him to open the series, but he never answered.
He came to JNU also. Yeah.
And I was told that he is in retirement. He's in that golden place, which is retirement.
Yes.
That's exactly. I thought that
I met him about a few months ago. He was kind enough to organize a presentation of my dictionary at the Colegio de Mexico. It was the last time I saw him. And I tried for several channels to contact him, but maybe he's in the nirvana of jubilación.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I feel too. So
He's
that's
in
why
that
I was
process. Yeah,
asking
he's
the
allowed
question.
to.
So he's far beyond all of us. I think that's
Okay. Thank you,
okay.
thank you, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you to everyone. Yes.
Thank you. Gracias, Óscar.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, goodbye.